DATALOG number 37, dated 3124.
Destroy the flesh and keep the metal, they always taught us. They'd say it over and over during the training runs. MECHs ain't cheap, but these mercs weren't learnt in physics. While I trust these guys to be able to pull a trigger, I don't know if I'd say the same about my confidence in their ability to decipher a data pad. It might be ancient history, but I'm sure keen to believe that old boy who said matter cannot be created nor destroyed. You see, that's got me thinking. The flesh is powered, right? Some sort of electro pulse pumping the blood through your veins. They call me superstitious, speaking all this mumbo-jumbo, and even gave me the call sign Scoob over this. But I think I'm onto something. You see, I'm driving a dead man's mech, and I think when we blasted him, that little electric pulse didn't go to some sort of afterlife, but went straight into the wiring of this rusted bipedal beast. This thing don't always run right, and I swear it's him, that guy, the pilot. Sometimes it's like a static whisper in my comms that ain't supposed to be there. Sometimes the radar has an incorrect chirp. I can't be driving this thing and lose impulse control again. But they don't believe me. This mech is haunted, and I'm afraid it's gonna be my metal casket too.
Hi, I'm Empty. I've been on a personal mission to play every single mech game and debrief my thoughts about them here. Today we're taking a look specifically at games that bridge the gap between two very specific genres, that being mech in the form of giant robots, and horror in the form of all things scary, spooky, or gruesome. If you'd like to stay tuned to my channel, we always love to see that you hit the subscription button, and if you just want to talk about the wide world of Mecha, feel free to use the comment section. Before we figure out how applicable horror is to bipedal war machines, let's take a brief refresher on what exactly horror means in the first place. Horror as an adjective is defined as something calculated to inspire feelings of painful and intense fear, dread, or dismay. Since everybody seems to have their own individual sense of fears, this actually becomes pretty open to interpretation. Some people are terrified of the idea of aliens, while others afraid of ghosts, the dark, or even just walking outside to the mailbox. Typically, though, there are a lot of common archetypes of things that are found frightening, so before we get into how these themes play into mech games, let's get a general idea of a few of these. While the basis for every subgenre of horror is maybe as simple as breaking fear itself down to factors like the unknown, the unnatural, and the loss of control, there are many different ways this can be achieved, like psychological horror that focuses on the mental and emotional strain of characters who often spiral into insanity, or supernatural horror that involves ghosts, spirits, and demons from the afterlife. In contrast to paranormal frights, there are a lot of slasher flicks that take a more grounded and realistic approach with the threat of real-life modern serial killers. Sometimes it's less about the monsters themselves and more a romantic view of the dark and dreary and tense atmospheres, and we see this in gothic horror. Or even it's as simple as gross-out zombie gore fests. Now, when it comes to relations with mecha, or maybe technology in general, I think the easiest connection is probably with body horror, this being a theme of corruption of the biological form to become unnatural in some way, usually through the likes of transformation, violation, and destruction that ends in a loss of autonomy. We can see this transhumanist horror in tech theme with the likes of Akira or Cronenberg's freaky film Videodrome. At first visual inspection, mechs almost always start off with the basis of the human form, which could easily be thrown into that uncanny valley territory, but I think we can also point out opportunity for the horror to be not the machine itself, but the pilot, like the flesh bag pilots of Armored Core 6. Second to this, I've come to notice that mech genre is also littered with cosmic horror elements, eldritch space phenomena that elicit existential fears, forbidden knowledge tinged with religious esotericism, and the dangers of science, with aliens in a lot of empty, isolated, and lonely space. But are there any video games that manage to mix any of these elements together? Let's take a look. This first category is going to be taking a look at a few games where you are explicitly piloting a big robot vehicle yourself. You'd expect to feel a lot safer inside one of these great armored machines, but that isn't always the case. If you've been paying attention to the background footage so far, you've been watching Null Resonance. It's a relatively short and free experience, newly created by Chris Hall. It felt very atmospheric for me during my playthrough, I think a lot of which was due to the sound design. More or less, this is a walking simulator with a few tense carnival game type minigames interspersed between mech driving sequences. What I really liked here is how unsafe I felt while even driving the mech around, because its movement was purposefully clunky and delayed feeling. That combined with machine failure requiring manual venting really kept me on the edge of my seat. While the number of short indie horror walking sim type games seems to be a wide pool, there is at least one other centered around mechs, Omega Point by Cathroon. You wake up to a red world and look up to the sky to have rain fall into your eyes, or maybe it's blood. You take a few steps into the light and figure out it's coming from a big mech. Once we get in this last surviving doctrine and fidget with all the buttons, slowly bringing the machine to life with a hum, we discover a radio broadcast, letting us know that despite rejecting collective consciousness present from the Ecumenical Council, they're coming to take us. We've got a 30-minute timer and an in-and-out radio signal to wait out our end. This one is much less of a game, as there really isn't much to do besides flip through the different radio channels and literally wait for the time to go up. Some of the radio is modern rock or electronica tunes, others cut from old radio broadcasts, number stations, or military aircraft archives. This one is more of an art project than a standard game, but I came away from the experience thinking that it could be added to in ways that develop out gameplay aspects and hedge up the horror, like the environment slowly reflecting your draining mental state, or a cohesive story told through the different radio waves. This is one of those sit in front of a control panel type games. Don't Feed the Monkeys, Five Nights at Freddy's, Iron Lung, a setup where you're sort of blind to the world around you besides using various screens to understand things. An array of analog controls, radar screens, micromanagement of resources, and so on. Personally, I haven't managed to play this one yet, but I am super excited to because it looks like the Maniac Martian really hit it out of the park with this horror tale about piloting a mech into a dead colony to harvest the technology there. The catch? The machines seem to be infected. Your machine seems to be infected, and now it's hungry. If you like long, dungeon-crawling mazes full of minimalist wireframe monochrome visuals, then I've got a whole series for you. Grave Robber Foundation has put out 3 of these so far: Das Geisterschiff, Der Geisterturm, and Der Geisterjäger, the Ghost Ship, the Ghost Tower, the Ghost Hunter, respectively. All deep, dark sci-fi dungeons from the perspective of the driver's seat. If you want a fully comprehensive and deep look into this series, I'll point you in the direction of Bare Metal Brian's video, Der Geist, Tales of a Brutal Mecha Dungeon Crawler. But in short, these are all hardcore labyrinthian role-playing games. The story takes place after a post-apocalyptic event has roasted the surface of Earth and humanity has been led to live in these underground tunnels controlled by cyberpunk paramilitaries and government gangs. It's pretty bleak and dystopian. The oldest game on this list came on floppy disks for the PC-98. That'd be an old lineup of computer systems NEC made for Japan, and the game in question is 1993's Hamlet by Panther Software. It continues on the dungeon-crawling maze in first-person mech perspective, but this time maybe graphically things are harder on the eyes. It's pretty difficult to find information on this one, but luckily this game was remade in 1995 and released in the West on PlayStation as Space Griffon VF9. The story takes place as a squad of private military cleaners are sent to a moon colony structure named Hamlet that has recently stopped communicating with Earth. The party arrives to the sound of silence, besides the odd automated robots, and of course the bio-monster that they begin hunting down. I'm going to take a quote from our friend over at Keynova. It's pretty clear the developers over at Panther Software had a real love for aliens and The Thing. Space Griffon borrows heavily from The Thing's themes of paranoia, isolation, and unseen threats that insidiously infect our hosts. In many ways, the game feels like a long-winded mech-themed version of The Thing. If you'd like to check out his full review, the sci-fi horror you never expected on PS1, Space Griffon VF9, it will be linked down below. Last game I'll talk about that falls into this first-person simulator, shooter, dungeon crawler thing before we look at something a little different has got to be Kileak, the DNA Imperative from the original PlayStation. I think this is the one I hear get brought up the most when mech horror is mentioned. Though it appears to play relatively similar to the titles we've already been talking about, this one is set in a science base somewhere at the South Pole. You play as an international peacekeeping force agent whose organization has recently received a distress call. If you couldn't tell from the title, this is another tale of unethical researchers taking science too far. This time playing with alien DNA to make mutants.
Cartridge secured.
Sometimes you don't get to be in the mech. Sometimes you gotta be the little guy on the ground. And sometimes that is scary. There are a few games that beg the question, isn't it more scary if you exist in a world with mechs, but don't get to be a pilot? And here we have the 2024 extraction shooter Foreverwinter by Fundog Studios in all of its grotesque glory. In a nameless future, a grim dark mega war made up of destruction machines and biotechnology created horrors alike wage out battles on their own terms, while you get to play as the little guy, the peasant, the scavenger. You have one goal, to survive. Gameplay-wise, this means a lot of careful sneaking. You want to get the loot, but you have to be careful about it since you are so overwhelmingly outgunned. I will note this one is still sitting in early access and has seemed to have review scores in either direction at different points. Another title that riffs on this same sort of idea, albeit in a much less horror sense, is Generation Zero. Despite being set in the late 1980s, this one came out in the late 2010s and was developed by Systemic Reaction. It takes place in a Cold War era Sweden, except it presents a sort of co-op survival world where the enemies are all different forms of robots. These range from small animal-like animatronics all the way up to the big baddies that we just call mechs. Now, I think the horror element of this one definitely rings true to an extent in the very early game. That'd be the tension of traversing this empty liminal space-type world without resources to hold up against all of the metal monsters roaming about. This one might be a bit of a stretch to throw into the mech category, but it does feature an entire enemy list made out of various robots. Hounds, hunters, multi-armed krakens, hot air balloons, and so on. The premise is that you are a human who's being hunted by these steampunk-themed stereotypically British robot teams, as if they are on a great fox hunt and you are the fox. Your focus is to avoid confrontations using many different tools like traps and alarms and bottles. One thing I will say about this one is that the big robot team who created this made something I can only describe as feeling extremely early 2010s. Something about the more minimalized aspects combined with the stylized cartoony visuals strikes me as a keystone of indie titles from that day. Sometimes horror isn't going to necessarily come across with gameplay elements that have the intention to frighten as much as it can be used as a theme to see on a visual basis. Honestly, this is probably where I'm at on a personal level. There's something about the hallmarks of horror when they're presented in a less darkly serious and into a campy tone that is a much more comfortable vibe for me, as I don't know how much I actually like my pants being scared off.
Was the blood you spilled intoxicating?
In early 2024, Poppy Works released a follow-up to the 1999 third-person shooter Slave Zero, except this time they took the dystopian biopunk world and created a prequel which transitioned its gameplay into the 2.5D hack-and-slash beat-em-up space. A lot of the art design in this one is centered around biomechanical horrors. You can see flesh morphing into machines, skulls with Geiger-esque tubing, and darkened, gritty alleyways full of scummy corporate crime lords. Similarly, part of a series and working the 2.5D space, the Steel Mantis made Valfaris Mecha Therion is worth making mention. The visual space of this one is really nice, and the colorway reminds me of trick-or-treating massive neighborhood-wide Halloween events. The combination of dark and purple hues with extremely vibrant overlays of greens and reds is a sight to behold as you fly around this side-scrolling shmup. This one is full of background architecture created out of sci-fi cemeteries, decrepit mega buildings, and all sorts of skeletonized cosmic mutant beasts. Continuing to play in the Spirit Halloween type of visual space, 10 Tons Ltd created a couple games playing around with Lovecraftian themes and alternative history technology in the games Tesla vs. Lovecraft and Tesla Force. They're both similarly top-down view shooters. It seems Tesla vs. Lovecraft was the initial title, where the levels were more handcrafted and you beat down hordes of Cthulhu beasts while piloting a Tesla mecha, while the follow-up, Tesla Force, repurposes this idea into a roguelike with a procedural generated world. The final game of this category to speak on is Damian Kubiak's Mecha Knight's Nightmares. I have a full review of this one if you'd like to check that out entirely, but to put it shortly, it's a third-person horde shooter, and the horde you're fighting off is various forms of zombie mutant insect creatures. There are a few levels that do play into the more scare-your-pants-off tension, however the vast majority of this game is a Gatling gun-spinning gore-fest as you shoot through vast numbers of exploding red goo monsters. This one really makes me wonder, especially with the massive popularity in the 2010s, why zombies aren't more commonly enemies set against mechs. Luckily for us though, Mecha Knight's Nightmare's desaturated and completely grim outlook on the world is getting a sequel. There isn't a trailer up for this one yet, but we can take a peek at some early screenshots or follow the developer log through Discord and see it is coming to be a greatly expanded version of the previous game. Seems to be keeping in touch with the washed out colors, hordes of blood and guts, and super cool mech piloting. On a post-flood divine Earth, you pilot a massive mechanized diving suit attempting to climb toward the surface in hopes of rescue. It's supposed to feature complex and open-ended level designs, simulated and biodiverse ecological life, and encyclopedic esoterica spiraling into the insane. 3D Glyptics LLC so far has made this one of the most captivating looking upcoming games to me, as every bit of this immersive simulation is really sparking every bit of my curiosity. Grieve seems to be creating an experience that harkens back to the typical survival horror of the early 3D games of the 90s with Ares Breathes. In traditional Resident Evil fashion, this one is even featuring tank controls and the use of static cameras, except instead of being set inside a sprawling Midwestern mansion, this one takes place in a collapsed Martian colony. Part of the struggle here seems to be based around time management of your life support systems, as the mech suit has to maintain and upkeep things like hull integrity, oxygen, water, energy, and heat. The description for this one is very simple: Half-like with mech. This beautiful looking Unreal Engine game by Kakaru is set in a tech dystopia and seems to take a lot of inspiration from Valve's Half-Life 2, part of which seeming to be the horror-themed We Don't Go to Ravenholm level, where you face off against zombie-like creatures and sometimes resort to having to use crude melee weapons instead of guns. I will say that the overall tone in the trailer, even besides this, gives me a little chill up my spine. Besides that, it also seems to be taking cues from the gravity gun, but in this case the physics puzzles also involve you creating functional objects, a la Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. This, combined with first-person shooter gameplay that seems to bounce between on-foot sections and mech-piloted sections, is reminiscent of Titanfall. Kakaru has a tall order to fill with this one, but so far it looks like it's shaping up to be a very, very interesting game. And that's all we've got for today. If you know any other great games that play into the themes of mech and horror, feel free to drop them in the comments below. Thanks for sticking around all the way through.